Hi, I'm Kylie,
Hi, I'm Danielle.
and I worked in a self-contained classroom for students that were 11 to 15 years old. All the students in my classroom had multiple disabilities, and most of which were at a third grade cognitive level.
And my students were also at a third grade cognitive level, and they were fifth graders in a inclusion classroom.
So for my lesson, I chose to do the life cycle of a butterfly based on the story The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle.
And I chose to do parts of a butterfly so that it built on vocabulary skills and worked on literacy components as well.
My lesson is about the life cycle of a butterfly. In learning about the life cycle of a butterfly, students will first listen to the read aloud of the story The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. When the students are listening to the story, they will be seated in a large circle. After the story, the students will engage in a classroom discussion. The students will then move to small groups in order to work on their activity. The students in my classroom had various impairments. Impairments of fine motor skills were seen in all 12 students in this class. This meant that when completing the activity, some students needed accommodations to their materials. Students were asked to use markers. However, some students do not have the ability to hold a marker like you and I may. Therefore, they were able to use bingo dabbers. This just requires a simple grasp and an up and down motion. This is something that all 12 students can complete. For the purposes of this lesson, students were also required to use scissors in order to complete their activity. However, for students with fine motor impairments, this is often a challenging task. In order for students to complete the activity, a simple accommodation was implemented in this lesson. That is the use of platform scissors. Platform scissors require that students use a simple up and down motion in order to complete the task. This motion is very similar to that of the bingo dabbers to color their paper. Students in this classroom used the platform scissors successfully and were able to complete the task. At the beginning of this lesson, students will listen to a read aloud of the story The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. The students are familiar with many other stories by Eric Carle as they've been participating in an author study. Students will already have knowledge of the basics of a life cycle as they have begun learning about it in their springtime unit. Students will listen to the story and listen for the 4 stages in the life of a butterfly. The teacher will be sure to highlight all 4 stages to aid in comprehension. Following the read aloud, the students will then engage in a classroom discussion. Included in this classroom discussion will be questions regarding the 4 stages. In reinforcing these stages, students will then be able to complete their sequencing activity. For this part of the lesson, the students will be arranged at tables throughout the classroom. Students will begin by cutting out the 4 images you see here. The teacher assistants will then help the students in cutting using the modified scissors. Once the students have cut out all 4 of their images, the teacher assistants will help the students arrange the images in the correct sequence. This will allow the students to then complete their template. Seen here is a sample of the butterfly template that students will complete. Once the students have glued down their images in the correct spot, they will be allowed to color their pictures in. When students have completed the sequencing activity, they will meet again in a large circle. During this time, students will discuss aspects they have noticed in this story, as they have also noticed in other stories by Eric Carle. After that discussion is ended, students will have the opportunity to show others their sequencing activity. In reflecting on this lesson, there were various accommodations made for the students. For example, there were accommodations made to the materials. Students used platform scissors and bingo dabbers if they were unable to use regular scissors and markers. This was a simple accommodation added to this lesson. During the read aloud portion, there were also accommodations made for students. For one, students at this age are typically able to read independently. However, the students in this classroom are not. So, allowing students to listen to the story was an accommodation for them. Also, during the read aloud and discussion portion of the lesson, students were asked yes and no questions. They can answer these questions using their communication devices or PEC symbols. This accommodation is another simple way for students to access the material. The read aloud activity proved to be very beneficial for students. Students were able to make connections between The Very Hungry Caterpillar and other texts by Eric Carle that they have read previously. Also, during the read aloud, students were provided basic information regarding the life cycle of a butterfly. The activity portion of this lesson allowed students to work on their sequencing skills. Sequencing skills are something that students have been working on throughout the entire semester. Providing opportunities to hone these skills is very important for students.
My objective for this lesson is students will label the parts of a butterfly with 80% accuracy. There are 5 parts of the butterfly, and in order to reach the goal, they need to complete 4 of the 5 labeling correctly. In the introduction of the lesson, students will turn and talk to their partners about the stages of the butterfly. This is a repeat from the day before when they talked about which of the cycles went in which order. Then, after a minute, students will turn and talk and share out in the group. Once they've done that, I will have students look at the last stage of the cycle, which is the butterfly. We'll talk about how we have different labels for our face, like eyes and ears and mouths and nose. And we have labels for a butterfly too. We're going to have the students watch a video, and in the video, a person draws a butterfly and labels the parts. This allows the students the repetitive notion of each part, as well as starting to think about each of the pieces of the part of the butterfly. After the students watch the video, I will ask the students to tell me a part of a butterfly. The students will then raise their hand and wait to be called on. When the students are called on and tell me a part correctly, they'll be able to pick up the label of the butterfly from in front of me and pin it onto the poster behind me with Velcro. Once all the parts of the poster are correct, we will leave the poster up in the classroom for further use. Next, I will show the students a labeling sheet. The labeling sheet corresponds with the poster we just created. In this labeling sheet, students will cut and glue each of the labeled parts of the butterfly. This allows students to focus on fine motor and gross motor skills. For those who have difficulty in fine and gross motor skills, they can use an iPad with a digital version of the worksheet. This will allow the students to click, drag, and drop each of the labels onto where the butterfly parts belong. Once all the students finish the labeling, I allow the students to hand in all the sheets, and we'll go over once again, velcroing the pieces to our butterfly poster. When all the students have labeled the butterfly one last time, I will end the lesson and move on to another one. For further information and other times to do this lesson, I would go and pair it with a book, so students who do want to add more knowledge to their vocabulary or more in-depth parts, they will be able to do so.
After viewing our lessons, you may have noticed some connections between the two. For instance, they were both about butterflies. Mine was about the life cycle, as Danielle talked about the parts of a butterfly.
They both include science components with using the life cycle of butterfly and anatomy. They also have a literacy component using sequencing and labeling. Both activities are hands-on and interactive through the materials by utilizing fine motor skills.
And we both had to make accommodations to those materials for the students that were in our classrooms, as we had mentioned previously.
These lessons can be used over multiple days in a unit or can be incorporated as a mini lesson depending on the curriculum and the needs of our students.
And we both found that our lessons would be easy to differentiate based on the needs of our students. Thank you for watching.